Hello and welcome to Gone Phishing, a podcast from the North East Business Resilience Centre, aka the NEBRC, focusing on all things cyber related. Our aim is to help raise awareness and understanding among business audiences, supporting them to be better prepared and protected from the growing issue of cybercrime and fraud. I'm Rebecca Chapman, Director of the NEBRC and a Superintendent at South Yorkshire Police, with nearly 30 years policing experience across uniform and CID. Today, I'm delighted to be speaking to not just one, but two people from Lloyds. Brian Dilley, the Group Director of Economic Crime Prevention, who is Lloyds Banking Group and the founding chair of the NEBRC, and also Lee Bradley, the Director of Economic Crime Prevention Oversight, also from Lloyds. And perhaps maybe, Brian, you could start by saying why I've got two for the price of one.
Yeah, sure. So as you said, founding chair of the advisory board for the North East Business Resilience Centre, a role from which I'll be stepping down at the end of the year, and Lee will be taking my role on the board. As you know, we're looking for a new chair, but Lee will take my place on the board.
That's perfect. I'm really delighted to have both of you with us today. I'm hoping you can give us a unique insight into banking and how it connects with the NEBRC. If you could just start, maybe, Brian, just telling us a little bit about your current role and what it involves.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the Group Director of Economic Crime Prevention, and under Economic Crime Prevention, we include fraud, anti-money laundering, anti-bribery, and sanctions implementation. So quite a broad range of things. So, you know, in that type of role, you can go from, obviously, we've had a lot to do with Russian sanctions after the invasion of Ukraine. We deal with bribery and corruption. We deal with illegal wildlife trafficking. We prevent fraud against our customers and against the public purse. And we monitor transactions and customers for money laundering concerns. So quite a broad range, and each day can be quite unique. And that role is across all Lloyds banking brands, which is Lloyds Bank, Halifax, Bank of Scotland, MBNA, Lex Auto Lease, lots of others. I think I'm the money laundering reporting officer for about 25 different legal entities. So quite a broad and deep range of activity. And obviously, there's a very close link between those activities and cyber, although our cyber prevention team sits elsewhere within Lloyds, but we work very closely with them when we're looking at the threat actors for cyber and fraud, who are often the same people.
And if you weren't busy enough, I do know that you hold a number and have held a number of external positions within the industry. So just talk us a little bit through that.
So I sit on the Economic Crime Product and Service Board at UK Finance. I used to chair that, and I now sit on the board, as does Lee. I'm a board member of Stop Scams UK, which is an organisation, and a director of Stop Scams UK, which is an organisation set up to try and stop scams at source. It's a collaboration between banks, telcos, social media, and big tech, really trying to come up with some innovative ways to stop bank scams. One of the big items that we've delivered on that is the 159 fraud reporting line that you can phone and be guaranteed you get through to your bank. And then I could probably list half a dozen other things that I've been involved with over the years, and they're probably the main ones at the moment.
Yeah, so very busy. Lee, are you equally as busy?
I line into Brian, so I'd say I'm more busy, but my role reports into Brian, but I'm specifically looking at the policy for economic crime and also the oversight of policy as well. So yeah, a wide ranging role, but really, you know, my job and my team's job is there to hold our frontline colleagues who are dealing with economic crime to account, but also to support them as well. So an important role just to make sure that we're doing everything that we need to do in the fight against economic crime, and also keep Brian safe in his MLRO responsibilities. So me and Brian have worked close together for the last 6 years. Equally on the external side, as well as the economic crime PSB at UK Finance that Brian mentioned there, I'm also the chair of the UK Finance Fraud Committee as well. So we've got good representation across industry, which gives us that kind of wider view, as well as having the kind of in-depth view across the Lloyds banking group as well.
So Lee, sticking with you, how might this have changed over the last few years and the importance of kind of your remit today?
So the big change really has been in the cyber-enabled fraud side of things. So, historically, we used to see lots of fraud that were in the physical environment, like ATMs being attacked, etc. So, although there was a lot of that going on, they were quite easy to tackle and address. They would easily be identifiable within our data once we'd run some analysis. Nowadays, the big change is that a lot of the compromise events that happen from a fraud perspective happen on platforms outside of banking. So typically social media platforms, telecommunications, etc. So that makes it more difficult because we're a bit blinded to those compromise events. And that's where the organised criminal gangs now like to really target people, especially from a social engineering perspective, to really help to take over their accounts and then contact the bank to cash out. So it's made it a lot more difficult because people are being socially engineered. It's now sometimes the customers themselves who are making the transaction out on behalf of the fraudster, which makes it a lot more difficult to spot than in the older days when, as I say, it used to be the fraudsters trying to access the account. So I think that's been the big change. Within that, we've had to react by doing lots of consumer education and awareness to the threats that are out there. I think the other banks have done likewise. If you're watching TV nowadays, you'll typically see lots of campaigns around possible scams that are out there. And I think we need to continue that, whilst also we try to enhance our systems as well to spot those anomalies in the behaviour, even if it is a customer that's making the transaction on behalf of. So I think that's the big change. I think businesses equally have been targeted by fraudsters in a similar way. Finance teams at different businesses can be socially engineered to make payments out. So we've seen increases in that area as well. So we're trying to work through some of the work that Brian's doing with Stop Scams as an example with that wider ecosystem. So working with social media companies and telecommunication companies now to try and get to the point where we can share information cross-sector to tackle the problem. So we've got some green shoots on that, I would say, but it's still in its infancy, and we definitely need to build that out as quick as we can.
Yeah, things change, don't they, very quickly in the world of cybercrime. The threat landscape changes quite quickly. So, Brian, obviously you've been involved for over 20 years in this industry. What have you seen change over that time?
I think as Lee was saying, that the methodology, the delivery channel, I guess, to getting to the customers is the big change. I'm always amazed actually when we talk about cybercrime being completely different to the types of scams and frauds that we looked at in the past. I mean, a lot of the scams are the same methodology, but with a different narrative over the top. So particularly for some of the things, as Lee was saying about where the customer is duped into making the payment rather than the unauthorized access, that's been a big emerging theme over the last 6 or 7 years, I guess, is probably the period where that's really grown. But you heard people, including Home Secretaries, actually saying about during the first lockdowns there'd been a massive increase in COVID fraud, and actually what that was exactly the same MOs that have been happening before, but instead of getting a message that says your Royal Mail delivery is due tomorrow or whatever, it said your vaccine is due, or you've been in contact with somebody that's got COVID. So the underlying methodology that the fraudsters were undertaking was exactly the same. It's the narrative to draw the customer in, draw the victim into believing that this is a genuine person or genuinely your bank getting in touch with you, which is one of the reasons we talked about 159 earlier. That's one of the reasons for setting that up, because the point of that is that it's supposed to be a number that anyone can call, and then you get through to your bank, whichever bank it is. So if you receive a call in and that purports to be from your bank telling you your account is unsafe or anything like that, then you can hang up and dial 159, and you know that you're speaking to your bank. But as I say, the underlying methodologies haven't changed. It's just the narrative that goes over the top that changes, and it changes every 5 minutes, right? So there'll be a new one next week. There was a new one last week, and whatever is topical will be what they try and use to draw people in.
Yeah, it's really hard to try and keep up with the trends and the patterns. And obviously, I speak to people in the community who have been had over in various different ways by tricksters and fraudsters. And certainly since I joined the police, it used to be somebody frog marching somebody to an ATM to draw out money. And now it could be anything from romance fraud to CEO fraud, and taking over people's details online. What advice would you give to people that, because obviously the trends are still there, the patterns are still there, it's still on the up. What advice would you give to people?
So I think for small businesses, the area that we still see most of the scams for small businesses is what we call as business email compromise, or BEC scam, which is CEO fraud is one variant of that. And I think I've always found it's a little bit misleading to talk about business email compromise, because often it's not compromised. So there's two different ways that this can happen. One is when your work email is genuinely compromised, as in somebody has managed to get inside the company's email, and therefore they send you an email from your CEO's address or somebody else saying there's an urgent payment to be made. The hybrid in the middle is where your domain is not safe, and there are tools out there that you can use to assess whether your domain is safe. So you might have a situation where, if your address is Northeast NEBRC, for example, if that was an email domain, then anyone could set up an email address with NEBRC at the end of it, and therefore you could set up, CEO at NEBRC and send an email out. And then the other one, which is very common, which is actually they just send an email from an address that looks like the address. So it might have a 3 instead of the E for NEBRC, or if it's something with an L in it, it might have a 1 instead of an L, and therefore it looks like it comes from that email address. So there's only 1 digit different. The advice is, because as you can hear, that's quite complicated in terms of the different ways that you can identify whether it is a compromised email or an email that's got a similar address. The advice is never make a payment off of the back of an email if you haven't spoken to someone. So now the emails will often say, I'm stuck here, I'm stuck there, I can't speak to you, because the fraudsters will be desperately trying to make sure that you don't call them back. But call them back on a number that you know, because we've also had some situations where somebody in that business email compromise, they get sent an invoice or a letter with a phone number on it, and they go, oh yeah, I remember, I've had the training, I need to call back, and they call back on the number that's in the email that they received, which of course is the fraudster's number. So the advice is, whenever anyone's asking you to make a payment, and particularly an urgent payment, always phone back on a number that you have used before, or a number that you trust, and confirm it, because as you can see in the variety of different scenarios, it's almost impossible to know that it definitely came from the person who said who purports to have sent it. And of course, in some of those as well, if it is actually a compromised email and they've got access to an inbox, they will also put some personal commentary in there that relates to your prior conversations with that person. So if you said, Billy starts school this week, it will come back and say, oh, I hope Billy's got on okay at school. Can you make this urgent payment? So, you're drawn in because you think, well, that has to be from them, because who else could it be from? So the advice is always call back on a number that you know will get you through to that person.
Yeah, thanks for that. I was at a conference recently on cybercrime and fraud, and actually it could have been the same 2 conferences, because fraud seems to overlap now into cyberspace. So the things that you're hearing at a fraud conference are exactly the same things that you're hearing now at cyber. Would it be more helpful if, to the general public, that the guidance was all issued, in the fraud arena or the cyber arena, one or the other, but maybe not both? Or does it need to be called something different maybe? What do you think, Lee?
I think we're at the point now, I think, where it does need a coordinated effort just to have one message going out to the general public. And this is what we're pushing for as well at industry level and with government, because it feels like we're at a point where, like the 5 a day message that got pushed out by government that hit home. We almost need similar messages going for fraud. And I don't think it really matters what you badge it as, whether it's cyber fraud or whatever. The message just needs to be a simple one. And I think the messages need to be about kind of, what to do, but also what not to do. The fraudsters will always try to get people into an emotional state to make a payment. So, as Brian just mentioned there, the emails that come through, the contacts, it will always be something urgent that needs doing there and then. So it's very, very important that people, take the time just to step back as well if it is something that's being pushed through urgent and unexpected, to make the right decisions in a less emotionally charged way. So I think the messages need to come through loud and clear. It needs to be consistent, but it needs to be simple so that people can understand, what actions they need to take as well. Because at the moment, there's lots of people pushing lots of education and awareness out there in slightly different ways. It's all well intentioned, but whether it all hits home is debatable. Whereas I think if you've just got very clear and concise messaging, sometimes that will work better.
I think as well, it depends on whether you're talking about consumers or small businesses. So I think for consumers, they really don't distinguish between cyber and fraud. I mean, basically all of these things are ways to try and extract money from them. When you're talking to a small business, of course, there is a separate aspect of defending your perimeter as a small business against cyber attack versus the attempt to defraud you with cyber fraud. So I think there's a slightly nuanced message for businesses that you don't have with consumers. With consumers, it's just this is all cyber fraud, and they wouldn't distinguish between them.
So Brian, I'll come to you. What are the trends and patterns that you and your teams are spotting today with regards to economic crime, particularly?
Yeah, so I think certainly the interaction and overlap between fraud and money laundering, those edges have become much more blurred over the last few years. I think in particular, for example, the emergence of money mules. And I should have said earlier, actually, by the way, so we feel strongly that the move into authorised fraud has been, at least in part, as a result of the more stringent measures to prevent unauthorised fraud. So all of the security measures that have been put in place that have made it harder for fraudsters to access bank account, credit cards, or spend on credit cards, etc., has meant that they've moved into scamming the customer, because obviously the customer doesn't have those protections around them. I think similarly for money laundering, whereas in the past it may have been possible to control bank accounts within institutions more easily than it is today. What they've then therefore done is moved on to money mules, and money mules can take a whole range of aspects to them. So you've got the witting money mules, which are the ones that are basically, they know exactly what they're doing and they're allowing their account to be used for criminal purposes. You have the unwitting money mules, so sometimes criminal money is put into somebody's bank account without them knowing, and then the criminal will go to them and say, "Oh, I've made a mistake. I've made a payment into your account. Can you just pay it back to me? But for your troubles, you can keep a percentage." And then you've got your professional mule herders who are basically going around gathering up these people to use the bank account. So that's definitely been a big change over the last few years. And actually over a period, you see different populations being most targeted and most at risk. And there's some horrific stories. We've had stories of mule herders in schools, as in the older children in school bullying the younger children to have access to their bank accounts on behalf of criminal gangs who then pass their money through these accounts. So this is young children who are kind of afraid of the bully, as opposed to allowing their account to be used for criminal purposes to make money out of it. So that moves around. We've seen students, university students in particular, is a big population for that, where we've recently done some training at a couple of universities, because the students are basically approached and told, you're struggling with your university fees and cost of living, etc. You can make a bit of money here, and they're allowing money to pass across their account. So that's been a big change, I think, over the last few years. We used to be looking for criminals' accounts that had multiple payments through. Now we're looking for one payment that goes through an account that has possibly operated for 20 years without any problems. And then trying to work out, is that account holder, did they know what they were doing? Did they get duped? Did they disregard the risk? Were they naive? And then from that perspective, do they therefore go on the list that is held centrally to say this person has allowed their account to be used or not? Do you kind of give them the benefit of the doubt, or do you stop them from having a bank account for the next few years? It's quite a tricky challenge, but I would say that's probably the biggest move in money laundering. When you look at sanctions compliance, obviously been a massive change this year because of all of the sanctions that have been put in place against Russia, which hasn't been anything new, but it's probably been many years worth of sanctions in the space of about 6 weeks. So it was just the volume of it that was the issue. But we're now moving into a realm with sanctions compliance where we're talking about putting caps on the price of oil, for example, which is a very different. Most of our sanctions compliance that we do is you screen names for payments and say, well, these are the people that you're not supposed to deal with. If you start saying, actually, what you've got to do is look for oil prices that are above the minimum level set by international governments, then that's a very different process to a screening solution that we use today. So I think that will be a challenge going forward in the sanctions space.
And Lee, where do you think the money is going from all this fraud?
I mean, the money obviously is going through the system into criminal gangs to be laundered. So I mean, it filters through into all sorts of harms against society. So the earlier we can catch it at the fraud point, the better. But yeah, certainly going into criminal gangs' hands. Whether that's coming through money from drugs, human trafficking, etc., and then through to be washed. So it's important that we keep on top of it, and we've got the monitoring at both the fraud execution level, but also when that money's been passing through the mule accounts that Brian's mentioned there. The gangs are never going to go away. They just kind of displace. So once we put strategies in to prevent one area of crime, they quickly migrate to another area of the banking system in particular. So it's important that we remain alert, keep on our toes, and are constantly evolving not only the strategies that we have in now, but the solutions, the decisioning points that we will put in the future as well. So we certainly at Lloyds we invest significant sums year on year to try and keep ahead of the game. I know our industry counterparts likewise as well. So yeah, it's important that we continue to do that. We continue to try and prevent and disrupt wherever we can, and also kind of work together, not just across our banking industry, but cross sector as well, to really make sure that everybody's putting a joint effort into preventing crime at every level. But yeah, it's certainly not going away and keeps us busy at the moment.
I think with it's such a fluid thing, fraud and cybercrime, where quite a lot of the money ends up out of the country, can't be traced, there's no court case, there's no judicial outcome, there's no closure for the victim. So obviously prevention's better than cure at the other side of it. Now you're both clearly on the forefront of emerging security measures. What are the current priorities in the economic crime space?
So we've had a lot of changes to legislation as a result of the war in Ukraine, but a lot of those were many years in the pipeline. So it's good to see a lot of them going through, and we've got, I think, 4 different pieces of legislation going through at the moment that have an impact on economic crime. Delighted, by the way, to see the online safety bill coming back to the House of Commons next week, actually, which is really good news. So, but within all of those, I think the number one priority is about sharing information and working together. And there's been I would say, a difference of opinion for many years on what we can and can't do. And that hasn't been helpful in getting everyone to the table, because if your assessment is there is some risk in sharing the information, then some banks would say, well, I don't want to take that risk. We take the view that actually the benefit of sharing is greater than the risk of action for sharing. But obviously you've still got to share that information carefully. And some of the things that we've been working on, for example, is sharing information in real time between banks and between different industries in order to identify a scam in progress. So, for example, at the moment, one bank makes a decision as to whether its customer is being defrauded. And then if it decides, if it's given a warning to its customer and doesn't have any reason to hold on to that payment, it then pays the payment to another bank. The other bank has no idea that you'd raised concerns in the first place. And the bank that's sending it has no information about the type of account they're sending to. So we've been running a pilot to look at, well, what would happen if when we send a payment, for example, we say we're sending this payment, but we gave a fraud warning on this for the following reasons. And actually, before we send it to you, can you tell us a bit about the account we're sending to? Because this is supposed to be a payment to a builder. And then the other bank could say, well, that's interesting because this account's in the name of this entity, but we don't think it's a builder. So it's that sort of thing. And that's just between banks, right? So now imagine you have that scenario where you're then sharing with the telecoms about where did the phone number come from, what's the subscriber details, etc. So I think for many years we've been operating in isolation as individual banks, as a banking industry, as individual telecoms and social media. And we have to be able to put all those pieces together because the fraudsters are all working together, right? So then they're not operating in isolation. So we need to be able to do that, but we need clarity and we need everyone to have the same view on what we can and can't do, which is what some of the legislation that's going through at the moment is intended to do.
Lee, anything else to say on that?
No, I mean, I agree with what Brian said. I suppose we covered it earlier about, the more information we can share cross-sector, the better insight we have in terms of what the fraudsters are ultimately doing. I think within all of that as well, making sure that certain sectors who are enabling fraud, come to the table and help as well. At the moment, the liability sits firmly with the banks in terms of the losses at the end. It'd be good if some of the sectors could help out a bit more than what we currently have. As I say, we're seeing green shoots in that, which is really positive. We just need more help. I think the more data we can join up across all the different touch points through the journey of a fraud or a piece of money laundering, the better, because those kind of data points are going to be crucial in our fight against economic crime in the future. So positive first steps, but yeah, we just need to try and build as quick as we can, because to Brian's point as well, the organised criminal gangs are working together and they're trying to stay ahead of us. We've just got to make sure that we work at the same pace.
So that brings me kind of full circle round to, why did you both get involved in the NEBRC, and kind of what role do you think that the centre has to play in the future?
So I think the reason I got involved in the first place was because, there's a whole range of reasons. I mean, firstly, I think, educating small businesses on how to protect themselves against cyber and fraud is the right thing to do. It fits with our team's purpose is about reducing the harm caused by criminals and terrorists in our local communities. So clearly it meets that objective. Obviously, if those happen to be customers of Lloyds, if we're educating them in how not to be the victim of fraud, then whilst in many cases with businesses, Lloyds is not liable to reimburse them, it's still not a great experience if your bank has not identified and stopped a fraud against you, regardless of whether the bank's done anything wrong. I think there's usually a perception from businesses that the bank should be protecting them against those things. So that's another benefit. And then, of course, the question of cyber defences and fraud awareness is multi-layered. So when we look at the protection for the bank, then we have a whole range of tests that we do on our suppliers to make sure our suppliers are secure and they're not a route into the bank. And then in recent years, we've gone on to, well, what about our suppliers? Are they secure as well? But of course, we can't go to our supplier, and that entity is likely to be a relatively small business. And therefore, if we can get the message out through the NEBRC as to how those people can protect themselves, then we make the whole ecosystem safer. So I think it fits with our principles, our priorities, our core mission. But also there are individual benefits, I think, to a wider understanding of how to protect yourself against fraud and cybercrime.
And what are you looking forward to, Lee, being part of the board going forwards?
Just a continuation of all the good work that you've already done, to be honest, Becky. Obviously, Brian's given me a full kind of brief on all the activity that you've done historically. So I'm just looking forward to be part of that, really. I mean, to Brian's point as well, we're both passionate about preventing economic crime. I'm from the northeast as well, which Brian can't claim. So it's great to be involved in something locally as well. So just really looking forward to getting involved, getting the message out, helping to protect small businesses. Again, if businesses fail on the back of economic crime, that has a knock-on effect to all their employees and consumers and then society at large. So if we can help to prevent that, then yeah, I'm definitely up for that challenge.
And how important do you think it is, and this question is probably to both of you, that it stays local, that the people in the northeast of England are getting advice from people who are delivering a service in the northeast of England, and businesses or our trusted partners are in the northeast of England?
I think it's it's very important, because I think the local businesses will tend to listen to other local businesses and other local voices. So particularly when you're talking small businesses, small businesses aren't normally going to take their lead from central resources, out of London, out of big corporations, etc. And I think there's a difference between there's the people we're trying to reach as part of the NEBRC versus some of those larger kind of national corporations. So we're not trying to reach the big national corporations who will have their own commercial suppliers for a lot of these things. We are specifically trying to target the smaller businesses who don't know how to go about doing things. And I think they're easier to reach when you do that locally than if you do it particularly from London. I think in some of these things, because people are unlikely to travel to London for a seminar on something like this, but they are likely to travel in their local region. And part of that is also about the network that you build with other businesses locally as well. It's not just about the advice that you get from the organisation. It's about the connections that you build and the lessons that you share.
Lee, do you feel the same way?
Yeah, absolutely, Becky. And I think obviously leveraging the resources that you already have at your disposal, knowing your own patch, so to speak, is really helpful, I think, then in tailoring the message as well. So I think having that local edge to it can sometimes be the difference between someone, kind of really listening to the message and taking the relevant actions and perhaps listening, but maybe not kind of, implementing it to its full extent. So I think working on a more local basis is definitely the way to go to get the best benefit.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I went all the way down to London to get Brian to be the chair, and then we've ended up with you, and you're already up here. It's good news.
I suppose it shows the benefits, though, doesn't it, of kind of pulling on all the information that we have, across the UK, but then tailoring the message at the end. I think that's the answer, really. There's lots of resources across the UK that we can leverage, but we need people to take action at the end of the day, and I think that kind of local messaging helps with that.
I agree. Well, it's been absolutely fantastic to talk to you both today. My heartfelt thanks goes to Brian for agreeing to be the chair in the first place and kicking off this whole thing sort of 3 years ago. And we wish him all the best in his retirement. And I really look forward to working with you, Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thanks very much.